let's ask Misha Glenny to make a comeback on stage. Welcome.
Thanks,
back
Peter.
again.
Thank you.
And let's get this interaction between the stage and the audience going. All your excellent questions and comments. Let's start from the top. President, about the Cyber Center in Tallinn, how long has it been operational? What was the initial trigger to set it up?
Well, the initial trigger was that we just thought it was a good idea, and looking at the level of cyber sophistication elsewhere among the allies, we thought that, well, this is something we know better than anyone else. And this is before April 2007.
Misha, how did you find and how did you get
contact with the criminals?
How did you contact the criminals?
This was very interesting because before I wrote Dark Market and spoke to criminal hackers, I had written a book called McMafia on the global criminal underworld when I'd gone around the world talking to people from conventional organized crime. And although those characters were more visible, they were more difficult to get hold of, and I had to employ various methods before they would agree to see me, and it took months and months and months. What I found with digital criminals is that they were once I had attracted their attention, they were very happy to speak to me. About half of them were in prison, so I knew where they were located.
But were you in danger, or are you in danger?
No, I think I was in more danger doing McMafia than I was with traditional organized crime, than particularly one or two characters in the Balkans, than I was doing Dark Market. But what's really important about this is that once you get their attention and once they become engaged in this, they're like most other people on the planet, is they want to tell their story. And actually, after I had got their confidence, they were incredibly open.
This is a therapeutic
It is. There's a therapeutic element, but B, they feel themselves to be masters of their particular industry. And they want to demonstrate that. They want to show, you know, I'm top of the pile here. You're talking to a really serious character.
Which countries, question to both of you, I guess anyway, for practical purposes, which countries do you see as cybersecurity forerunners, and why? Estonia, of course, I mean.
Well, we had one case, and I mean, as I said, it was part of a national development idea. But I'll give you an altogether different example. I mean, for years we've been trying to get Misha's country, the UK, to pay attention, and they were thinking,
that's so conservative.
And then suddenly at the Munich Security Conference 3 years ago, first of all, Prime Minister Cameron came out with half his speech was on cybersecurity, and then Foreign Secretary Haig devoted his entire speech to cybersecurity. And then Pauline Neville-Jones, who I guess was, well,
she had just left as Minister of Security.
And so I said, but I've known her for years and years. I said, what happened? And she goes, well, nothing. The government actually wasn't doing anything. It was just that we realized how big a part of our economy relied on intellectual property, how much we were being attacked, and we realized that all our companies were investing billions and billions of pounds in R&D, and then someone would suck it out. And then they said, we better start paying attention to this because it is an attack on our economy. And so that motivates countries. I mean, there are different reasons. We did it just because we want to leap ahead. I mean, whatever reason, why is Finland so tech savvy? Well, that's the wrong word, I shouldn't say it. But why is it so sophisticated, whereas some other countries are not? Similarly, in the United States, I was told exactly the same thing. When people finally realized how much was being stolen, they said, we better start investing in this in a big way.
Absolutely. I mean, in my experience, the Nordic countries are really up at the top as a whole. And you're absolutely right about the UK. In the last 2 years, there's been this sudden rush of interest. And of course, what that means is that if you come late to a subject like this, you're in a panic. And what we're seeing in the UK is nobody really knows who's meant to be doing what. There is no coordination. Whereas if you look at Estonia, which has the advantage, of course, of being very small, what Estonia has been able to do has develop over a period of time rational structures in cybersecurity, which is something that the bigger countries are still struggling with.
I would just add here, one of the proudest moments I've had is that when the government minister for IT in the UK actually came to Estonia and told our guys, please send someone over for 2 months to do an audit on what we've done wrong. Now, if you've been dealing with the UK, anyone, I mean, over the past 300 years.
300 years, yes.
I mean, for the UK to ask anyone, let alone Estonia, to second someone to do an audit is pretty amazing. But I guess that shows how bad it's gotten.
It's got very bad, which is why I mentioned Jonathan Webb, who's the head of MI5. Jonathan Evans, I mean, sorry. Jonathan Evans, you never see the head of MI5. And that was what was so remarkable 4 months ago. He suddenly came out in public, showed his face, which he never usually does, and says, we are facing a catastrophe here. One of the problems with the United Kingdom is the same in the United States as well, is that we get people working in government who are working for relatively modest salaries. And as soon as they develop a requisite amount of technical skill, in come the big boys and pay them salaries 5, 6 times as much.
Or 10.
Or 10 times as much. And GCHQ last year, which is an absolutely critical part of global intelligence services, put out an appeal saying we are hemorrhaging people to the private sector. And here is a very important thing going forward. It's the relationship between the education system and the cybersecurity industry, because we are not exploiting people in their teenagers who will become key cornerstones of this industry.
Well, I'll tell you what our solution is, which is actually, in fact, is being studied now by the French even, which is, and the US, which has adopted what we've done. Which is that we, like many countries, have a national guard or a home guard. And then we created a cyber home guard. And the cyber home guard operates precisely on this principle that, that you want the best and the brightest, but the best and the brightest are working at Skype in our country, right? So how do you get them? I mean, you'll never pay them what they're being paid for. I mean, if Skype is hiring people away from Nokia with higher salaries, then what is the Estonian government going to do? So then we came up with this little trick, which is that basically we said, you can do this, you can volunteer for this. And first of all, people are to a degree patriotic. But it said, but in order to do this, you have to be accepted. You have to get a security clearance. And of course, then you have this thing, oh, do I get a security clearance?
Okay, it's a bit of a status sort of.
Right, and so we have leading top software engineers, code writers from top companies volunteering Thursday nights to do stuff. Like
Dad's Army with a lot younger.
But there's one very important point that we've all missed at the moment here, and that is Unit 8200 of the Israeli Defense Force. Much of the globalized security industry in telecommunications, in IT, but also in physical security, has emerged from Unit 8200 of the Israeli Defense Force, which is a specialist technical unit, but is now the largest unit in the Israeli Defense Force. And of course, they have compulsory military service of 3 years, and you're always on reserve. And they have a high sort of patriotic motivation as well. And so what that identifies is that you can't do this in private sector alone necessarily, that the state could have a role to play, but it's finding out what that role is given the nature of your state.
Hey, we've got sort of 5 odd minutes left, so let's go to one of these some more locally bound sort of Finnish questions. What do you think Finnish business leaders should do to avoid nasty cyber surprises? A few good tips and hints.
Well, it's difficult because it's really to do with a culture inside a company. And there's another question there. What is your one single advice to a CEO of a global business? And this would apply to a Finnish business as well. And that is, in my opinion, the key thing is integrating cybersecurity as a matter of course in your other operations. If you keep it separate, then at some point there will be a disconnect which will impact very badly on your business.
All right. I'll be a little more technical in answering that, which is basically, I would sort of paraphrase Bill Clinton say, it's the architecture, stupid. And the way you design your security architecture in your company or in cooperation with the government, I would say at least make it a policy never to accept any document in any email that does not have a legal signature on it. Because, I mean,
that's axiomatic, absolutely.
I mean, because they got into the French president's office, they got into the US president's office. How? They find out on Facebook that there's some counselor, some advisor, some secretary. I mean, you find the secretary works there, you find the Facebook page, you find a friend, you fake an email, just the I love you thing. It's just spear phishing. The secretary or whoever opens it up, and then
bingo.
And then it's in, and all that. At that point, everything is being sucked out. So at least minimally a digital signature for every document.
Exactly, and those are things. Those are very basic things which I find one has to stress over and over again.
But is there an awareness which is sort of
It varies. It varies from company to company. I mean, it varies dramatically from company to company.
But it's still sort of the notion, the concept, does sort of feel, a bit too abstract still for.
You mean
for many? I mean, just the idea of a threat.
Well, after you've been hit,
yeah,
then you have an awareness.
Becomes a lot less abstract. That's why, I mean, a lot of us who work in this area are all waiting for the big event. But amazingly, big events happen quite frequently. We had one at the Royal Bank of Scotland last year where for a week, all of our accounts went haywire. There was one incident of a couple losing a house because the transfer didn't go through for the deposit on the house. And this was millions of customers, and a lot of people left. Last night I was flying here to Helsinki, and we were about to take off, and suddenly an announcement came over saying the entire Heathrow air traffic control computer system was down, and we would have to wait. And we waited for 2 hours, we waited for 2.5 hours. People just absorb those as a sort of matter of fact, and really they should be understanding we have low levels of resilience. We don't know what to do when these things happen, and you have got to be prepared for this. You are irresponsible as a CEO if you are not prepared for the eventuality of an attack or a failure.
And that goes true for government as well.
So do you see, give it 2 or 3 years or something, do you think we'll see sort of the big one? Sort of a big, huge attack that will,
the so-called Cybergeddon or digital Pearl Harbor. I don't think it will come Hollywood style, but I think certainly events will take place which will seem quite dramatic. But you cannot predict these things. Remember, we're now dealing with rapidly developing technology. It's just the same as 10 years ago. Nobody had heard of Facebook, and now we can't get away from it. The same is true in criminality, in cyber warfare, in cyber industrial espionage, that these things will come out of left field.
Or Gangnam Style, who would have known that?
South Korea, exactly. That's right. And whoever has seen the video, who understands why it's so popular?
But let me add, the other thing that, we didn't talk about at all, but the sort of military working together with cyber. The first time we actually saw this was in the Georgian War of 2008, when in fact, and you can read about this in Small Wars Journal in January of 2011, 2 articles on this. Basically, before an attack would come, there would be massive DDoS attacks in the area, which would blind or blanket the area so that no one could access their And we imagine that if there were ever to be a military conflict, just as in the old days, as it were, you would do the bombing beforehand to soften up before you went in with your troops. Here, we will be, whenever, if it ever gets military, you will be blinded, blanked out, everything will come to a halt. Even better if you can if you can make the electricity system fall apart or whatever, everything grinds to a halt, and at that point, your society is already immobilized, and then the military part becomes much easier.
Yeah, it's actually it's sort of like it is a completely new sort of dimensions, like the First World War when they got the.
There's also there's a difference between if cyber goes bad in the military sphere, we have to understand that there is a difference between cyber military activity and conventional military activity. If we look at nuclear, for example. We knew how many warheads the Russians had. The Russians knew how many warheads we had. We knew where they were stationed. We knew what the delivery systems were. You could count them, and there was a mutual acceptance of that. The problem about cyber is your assets, i.e. your nuclear warheads, are your opponent's vulnerability, which means that cyber is preemptive in its nature. You have to know where the weaknesses in your opponent's systems are, which is why the Americans have found Chinese sleeper viruses on some of their electric grid. This was 4 years ago. And similarly, I don't doubt for a minute that the Americans aren't up every orifice of the Chinese network system as well. That this is something we have to understand, that it is an inherently preemptive military operation, and that can result in errors. This is one of the big problems about cyber. There's all this stuff floating around there, and anything could go wrong.
Well, on top of that, the whole idea of Article 5 is that you give an appropriate response, so that if a rocket comes and knocks out your electrical plant, well, basically, you don't start World War III over that, but you will send a rocket and knock out something equivalent over there. Now, in cyber, you don't know who did it, and what is the appropriate response? The first answer, actually, to that question, or to those, came from the Pentagon in May of 2011, when they said, we do not consider it necessary to respond in the same modality. A cyber attack on us will be met with methods of our own choice.
Sort of like a casus belli.
Yes.
Thank you very, very much. It's real, sort of real-life sci-fi. It's very, very fascinating. And thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Peter.
Thanks.
Thanks.